This is Ross Feingold of the Taiwan Hashtag program hosted by the Storm Media Group, coming to you from Taipei, Taiwan. Today we'll be talking about the recent increase in the number of third parties vying for the upcoming legislative UN legislature, the parliament here in Taiwan elections, as well as potentially the presidential elections. Let's take a brief look at the history of some of the third-party movements during Taiwan's democracy era, which began in the early 1990s with direct elections for the legislature, the legislative UN, which was followed by direct elections for major municipalities, and then eventually in 1996, direct election for the president and vice president. In the early 90s, the Kuomintang had a split in a party that simply called itself the New Party, which was mostly made up of people who left the Kuomintang, had a very big splash when they first entered politics in the mid-90s. They won many seats, over 20 seats, in the legislative UN. They also were very competitive in local elections, such as city councils or their first attempt at the mayoralty of Taipei City. They did very well. They didn't win, but they had a very strong candidate. Then later, after the second direct presidential election, when James Song ran as an independent candidate, he lost, but then he formed a political party called the People's First Party. And in their first two attempts in the legislative elections, they did very well as well. They won a number of seats. Back then, the legislative UN was 225 seats, so you had a greater chance of getting in. Also, the constituencies were multi-member, and it was the first top group of 8 or so candidates in the constituency would all get into the legislature. It's since been changed to one single seat constituencies, so they've done away with the multi-member constituencies, and they've halved the number of seats in the legislative UN to 113. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Also, in the early 2000s, there was a pro-independence party which kind of broke away from the DPP. That was called the Taiwan Solidarity Union. Their spiritual leader was former President Lee Teng-hui, who had left the Kuomintang and came out and said, I actually support an independent Taiwan. So he had this political party called the Taiwan Solidarity Union. However, all those parties which I just mentioned, the New Party, which was a Kuomintang breakaway party, the People's First Party, which was partially a Kuomintang breakaway party as well as some independents, and the Taiwan Solidarity Union, which was a pro-independence, aligned with the DPP political party. Over the years and in recent elections, their strength has dissipated. It was kind of hard for them to sustain it. They didn't have enough financial support from the public, for example. The parties tended to be built around one personality. The chairman of the New Party has been the chairman for many, many years. PFP is built around one man, James Song. Taiwan Solidarity Union was built around Lee Teng-hui, who was, of course, now in his late 90s. Can't be very active campaigning for the political party. So all three of these parties that began with a lot of success, relatively speaking, for an independent third political party that was newly developed, did not sustain that in the recent elections, 2012, 2016 legislative UN elections, for example, local elections. They won a few seats in city councils or county councils, but not sustainable. We don't see those three parties sustaining themselves going into the 2020 elections. 2016, there was another party that appeared on the scene, which was called the New Power Party. Did surprisingly well, though people perceived them as being aligned with the DPP. They were definitely left of center. They have very progressive values, very similar to the DPP. But they said, look, we're not just going to fall in line with the DPP. We want to be a little different, a little bit independent. You know, it was obvious at the time that the DPP was going to win big. They were going to win the legislative majority. They were going to win the presidency. We saw this coming over the course of 2015. The KMT brand was very damaged. Ma Ying-jeou's poll numbers were terrible in the final year of his presidency. So the New Power Party formed over the course of 2014, 2015 to contest the 2016 elections. Did amazingly well. They had 5 members enter the legislative UN the first time around. This is an extraordinary success for a newly formed political party, keeping in mind there's only 113 seats. About 2/3 of them are from single-member constituencies. The other are off of the party list on a national basis. So the NPP, they won 2 constituencies and 3 off the national list. On the national list, you need to get about 5% of the national vote. They got 744,000 votes. Incredible success for their first time around. And they've been fairly responsible. People thought they'd be rabble-rousers based on some of the history of the personalities involved who have been involved in non-government organizations. They've been involved in civil society. They've been involved in protests against government policies of the former government of Ma Ying-jeou. But they've gotten into the legislative yuan, generally conducted themselves with an extraordinary degree of professionalism, very articulate on public policy issues, putting aside whether you agree or disagree with their policy views, but they've conducted themselves very well. However, over the course of 2019, the NPP has started to collapse. What's happened in recent weeks? Two of their legislative yuan members, two of their parliamentarians, announced they were leaving the party. There was some dispute internally in the party whether or not the party should endorse President Tsai Ing-wen. Some people in the party said that's the whole point of having a third party, that we're not the DPP, we're going to maintain independence, so we shouldn't endorse President Tsai for re-election. Some party leaders, including two legislators, one Freddie Lim, another Hong Si-yong from Taichung, they felt that we should endorse President Tsai. She does stand for many of the values that we agree with, and we're not running our own presidential candidate, so why shouldn't we endorse her? They left the party. The party chairman tried to negotiate a truce with the DPP over allotment of legislative yuan candidates, so maybe we could have some kind of agreement about you'll run in this constituency, we won't run in that constituency, you'll let us run in a different one. They did a little bit of that in 2016 as well, so there's some history. However, this did not go down well with all the personalities in the NPP, so the chairman wound up resigning. So months away from a legislative and a presidential election, the party had to suddenly select a new chairman last week, and the leading candidate, who's a city councilor in Kaohsiung, here in Taipei, she thought she was going to win, and it turned out she lost, and one of the serving legislators did win the party chairmanship by-election, and now they're back to trying to negotiate a deal with the DPP about cooperating in legislative yuan constituencies. There's no firm result from that yet. In addition, one of their legislators has been accused of allowing her staff members to inappropriately receive government subsidies as part of a program in Aboriginal areas. This legislator, she is a member of one of Taiwan's Aboriginal communities, and she's had to try and explain what her staff did or say that she wasn't involved in any wrongdoing, but the party suspended her there, and that will cause her to lose her membership in the legislative caucus that the party has, and now she's suing. So that also has impacted the strength of the NPP at just the wrong time. So I mentioned party caucuses. If you have 5 members of in the legislative yuan, you get to form a caucus, and that allows you to have more resources. It gives you a seat at the bargaining table when party caucuses are negotiating legislation, for example. So there's a great incentive to get into the legislative yuan and have as many members as possible, obviously, but you want to hit that threshold of 5 in order to have an official party caucus under the legislative yuan rules. So who are these new parties? Well, just this past weekend here in Taipei, yet another new party was announced, and this one was formed by a former mayor of Tainan who was a DPP politician when he was the mayor of Tainan. His name is Su Huanzhi. He formed a party called the Taiwan Renewal Party. Here's the interesting thing about his party and how it contrasts with other parties that have been formed by people associated formally with the DPP. Former Mayor Su of Tainan said Taiwan is the ROC and the ROC is Taiwan. I want to focus on tax reform issues. I want to focus on how taxes are collected and allocated between the central governments and the local governments. Basically, he wants more money to go directly to the local governments. That's understandable. He has a frontline view on that, having been a mayor of one of Taiwan's major cities. He also wants to focus on social spending. He wants to focus on elder care, child care, how the government can be more supportive of both of those. And that's a very popular issue here in Taiwan. A lot of people are concerned. It's an aging population, so there's concerns about elder care, and President Tsai's government has tried to do things about this. There's also concerns about the cost of child care, and that's why the birth rate is falling, because people don't have good options and affordable options for child care. So Su Huanzhi said, I'm going to focus on these issues. I don't want to focus on the statehood issues. I don't want to focus on whether or not we're independent or we should declare independence or we should be changing our name in the international community and things like that. Very interesting for a former DPP politician to be taking this kind of view. And it contrasts greatly with some of the other third parties that have been formed in recent months, including the Taiwan Action Party Alliance, known in Mandarin as Yibianigo Xingdongdang. This is the party that Chen Shui-bian, the former president, is considered the spiritual head or spiritual leader of. This party, of course, is going to be pushing for Taiwan independence. So these are former DPP people who feel that the incumbent president and the DPP government and majority in the legislative yuan are not doing enough, right? And that might be very interesting for people in our foreign audience who perceive that President Tsai has done a lot to distinguish Taiwan from China. Yet there are some people in the DPP camp, or formerly in the DPP camp, including former President Chen Shui-bian, who say you're not doing enough, so I'm going to form a new political party, and we're going to have candidates in the legislative yuan election, maybe even a presidential candidate who's going to push more. Another party that's doing the same thing is called the Formosa Alliance. They want to have a referendum on independence, on changing the country's name. Again, it's formed by people who were previously associated with the DPP. Another example is a party called the Formosa Pescadores Statehood Party. Again, it's people who were formerly DPP politicians, campaigned for the DPP, ran for office for the DPP, and they say, President Tsai and the current version of the DPP, you're not doing enough. Then there's another party called the Pristine Taiwan Alliance, Bai Siliama. What do they stand for? They say we're not going to endorse presidential candidates. We're just going to run legislative UN candidates, and we're going to focus on good public policy. So we're not really going to get into some of those independence or not debates. We're going to focus on monitoring whoever wins the presidential election and forms the government. Very interesting concept. We have to watch whether or not they gain any traction. And then, of course, there's Ko Wen-je, the mayor of Taipei City, who has formed his own political party called the Taiwan People's Party, and that was formed several weeks ago. They're now recruiting candidates for the legislative yuan. They haven't really formed their policy message yet, but if it's going to be anything similar to what Mayor Ko focuses on as the mayor of Taipei City, it's probably just going to be good governance, effective management of the apparatus of government. And that's what Mayor Ko sort of focuses on here in Taipei. People accuse him of being too favorable to China. I would expect that as his party forms its message, including on China issues, they're going to say, look, we're not going to try and rock things too much. We'll just stick with the name of Taiwan as the Republic of China. We're not going to push for the independence initiatives that some of those other parties that I mentioned has done. And then we shouldn't forget some of those other parties that I mentioned earlier. So the People's First Party will still probably win a few legislative UN seats. The new party, they'll run candidates. They have a presidential candidate. They might peel away some votes from Kuomintang candidates in some legislative UN constituencies. So we see that getting into the legislative yuan, forming a third party, it is very attractive to politicians. There's going to be a lot of effort on this. It could hurt the DPP if there's more of these pro-independence parties that peel away votes from DPP candidates. Could hurt the Kuomintang, depending on how strong Mayor Ko's party is, how many candidates that they field. Again, there's the People First Party will field some candidates as well. So don't forget the third parties. The legislative UN election is not just about the DPP and the Kuomintang. I'm Ross Feingold, and you've been watching Taiwan Hashtag.